The wrestling business can be brutally cruel. One day you're main eventing pay-per-views and the next day you're losing to mid-carders on house shows. One wrong gimmick change, one missed opportunity, and suddenly everything you built can come crashing down. The fans have long memories. They remember when you lost. They remember when you were a joke. And once that image sticks, it's almost impossible to shake. Let's start with one of the saddest stories in wrestling history. Despite being a former WWF champion, by the time the new millennium came around, Yokozuna had become little more than a joke. A big part of this was because of how much weight he had put on. He could barely move anymore as he wrestled all over the country on the indie scene. During his first run under Vince McMahon, Rodney was booked as one of the most scary heels the company had seen since superstar Billy Graham. When he first showed up, fans were in awe of his sheer size. Here was a man who looked like he could crush anyone who stood in his way. And for a while, that's exactly what he did. The character of Yokozuna was sold as a Japanese sumo wrestler, even though Rodney was actually Samoan. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the image. A massive man in traditional sumo gear, managed by the sneaky Mr. Fuji, crushing opponents with his deadly banzai drop. It was a simple but effective formula that worked perfectly. Only 6 months after joining the roster in October of 1992, Yoko shocked everyone when he beat Bret Hart for the world title at WrestleMania 9. Sure, he would lose it again to Hulk Hogan moments later in one of the worst booking choices of that time. But by the time summer came around, the big man was back on top. He would stay champion for 280 days, all the way until the Hitman got his revenge at WrestleMania 10. Even after losing the title, the San Francisco native was still a big deal. That was until he kept gaining more and more weight and became a danger to both himself and the company. WWE started moving Yoko down the card. They told him if he got back in shape, he would get his old spot again. Except he never did get back in shape. As the mid-90s went on, Rodney became little more than a mid-card tag team guy, relying on Owen Hart to do most of the work because he just couldn't wrestle anymore. After being released from WWE in 1998, things got even worse. His showing at Heroes of Wrestling in 1999 was a disaster. Fans watched in sadness as the former champion could barely make it to the ring. Sadly, his weight problems would play a part in his early death from pulmonary edema at just 34 years old in October 2000. Bam Bigelow was one of the most talented big men to ever step foot in a wrestling ring. With flames tattooed across his bald head and a body close to 400 pounds, he looked like a monster. But unlike most big men, Bam could do moonsaults and cartwheels. He was something special. Bret Hart called him possibly the best working big man in the business, and that's high praise from someone who wrestled just about everyone. When Bam first showed up in WWE in 1987, the company treated him like a future star. He was so highly thought of that heel managers like Bobby Heenan, Slick, and Mr. Fuji all fought over who would manage him. This was unheard of at the time. Usually the company decided who managed who. But Bam chose to be a good guy, picking Oliver Humperdinck as his manager. At Survivor Series that year, he was on Hulk Hogan's team and outlasted even Hogan himself. He pinned both King Kong Bundy and One Man Gang before finally falling to Andre the Giant. For a rookie, that was a big deal. These were established names, and here was this newcomer eliminating two of them on the same night. It seemed like Bam was destined for greatness. But a knee injury requiring surgery and a rough match with Andre the Giant, where Andre reportedly worked extra stiff with him, led to Bam leaving by July 1988. He spent years in Japan, teaming with Big Van Vader and winning tag team gold in New Japan Pro Wrestling. The Japanese fans could see his talent even if American promoters couldn't figure out how to use him. He came back to WWE in late 1992 and was placed in the main event of WrestleMania 11 against football star Lawrence Taylor. This was supposed to be his moment, but Bam lost. And not just lost, but lost to a celebrity who wasn't even a real wrestler. That loss destroyed whatever was left of his credibility. How could fans take him seriously as a threat after that? He found new life in ECW as world champion, having amazing matches against guys like Taz and Spike Dudley. But when he returned to WCW in late 1998, things fell apart again. He was paid good money, but the company didn't know how to use him. By the end, he was wrestling on Thunder against Shawn Stasiak. His final televised match came on the last episode of WCW Nitro in March 2001. Bam Bigelow passed away in 2007 at just 45 years old, never having gotten the world title run in WWE that many felt he deserved. John Tenta was a trained sumo wrestler who had competed in Japan before coming to wrestling. This gave him a real background that most big men in the business didn't have. He knew how to use his weight. He knew how to move. And when WWE brought him in as Earthquake, they had a ready-made monster on their hands. As Earthquake, he destroyed Hulk Hogan during his peak in one of the most memorable angles of 1990. Earthquake attacked Hogan on the Brother Love show in May 1990 and squashed him with multiple Earthquake splashes. The announcers sold it like Hogan might never wrestle again. Kids at home were genuinely worried about their hero. It was the kind of angle that made wrestling feel real. Because of such a strong showing, he would be a made man for years. He feuded with Hogan for months, and even though he didn't win the title, he was always treated as a serious threat. Even when he was put into a good guy tag team with Typhoon as the Natural Disasters, they were still treated as a real force, big enough to win the company's tag team titles at one point. But once Tenta left WWE in 1994 and went to WCW, things changed. The booking in WCW saw him lose much of his shine. They gave him the embarrassing gimmick of the shark as part of the Dungeon of Doom. It was just painful to watch a guy who had once been so feared now swimming around in a silly costume. When he returned to WWE in 1998, right as the Attitude Era was starting, he wasn't even allowed to bring back his famous Earthquake character. Instead, he became Golga, a masked figure in the comedy jobber group The Oddities. They had him carry around a Cartman doll from South Park. It was quite a fall for someone who had once been so feared by kids everywhere. At least John Tenta got to hide his face behind a mask for this one. Many people didn't even know it was him at the time. By 1999, he left again, only returning one more time in his old Earthquake look for the WrestleMania 17 gimmick Battle Royal. So at least when all was said and done, the big man got to go out on a bit of a high. Hercules Hernandez arrived in WWE in 1985 with a body that looked carved from stone. He was huge, he was powerful, and he had a look that screamed main eventer. The man was named after a Greek god, and he looked the part. He was managed by Freddie Blassie at first, then later by Bobby Heenan as part of the famous Heenan family. In November of 1986, he even got a shot at the WWE Championship against Hulk Hogan on Saturday night's main event. He put Hogan in his torture rack finishing move and came close to winning. For a moment, it looked like Hercules might be the next big thing. This was arguably the biggest match of his career, and he showed he belonged in that spot. His feud with Billy Jack Haynes over who had the better full Nelson was a highlight. Both men claimed to have the most devastating version of the hold, and they set out to prove it. They had a great match at WrestleMania 3 in front of over 93,000 fans. Hercules won their follow-up chain match and looked like a real threat. But after that peak, things went downhill fast. He lost to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 4 in a match that was supposed to build up Warrior. Before their match, Hercules had swung his chain at Warrior, but Warrior caught it. The two had a tug of war, and the chain snapped in half. The announcers gave Warrior credit for breaking it, showing everyone that Hercules wasn't as strong as he claimed. Then Bobby Heenan sold his contract to the $1 Million Man, who wanted to make him his slave. Hercules turned good guy by refusing to be owned by anyone. But as a good guy, he had nowhere to go. At WrestleMania 6, Earthquake squashed him in just a few minutes. The man who once challenged for the world title was now just another body to make other wrestlers look good. He formed the tag team Power and Glory with Paul Roma, and they had some success beating the Rockers at SummerSlam. But at WrestleMania 7, the Legion of Doom destroyed them in under a minute. Hercules was so upset about the match that he reportedly didn't even sell the finishing move properly. After that, Hercules spent his remaining WWE time as a jobber, losing to guys like Sid Justice and Bret Hart. He went to WCW in 1992 as the Masked Super Invader, but that went nowhere. Hercules passed away in 2004 at just 47 years old. During his first singles run in 1995, Mabel was being set up as the boss's next big thing. Before his singles push, Mabel had been part of the tag team Men on a Mission along with Mo. They were a fun act that got the crowd going with their hip-hop style entrance and colorful outfits. But Vince McMahon saw something more in the bigger half of the team. He thought Mabel could be the next great monster heel. At that year's King of the Ring, ahead of guys who probably deserved it more like Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, the big man was booked to win the whole thing. This was supposed to be his coronation moment, the start of his rise to the top. Sure, the Philadelphia crowd who watched this live weren't exactly happy. They booed throughout the whole thing. But that did little to change Vince McMahon's mind. A couple of months later at SummerSlam, Mabel actually main evented in a world title match against champion Diesel. Here was a man who had been a mid-card tag team guy just months earlier, now fighting for the biggest prize in the company. It was a huge leap that the fans didn't buy into. But after a botch that almost seriously hurt Diesel, McMahon decided it was best to start moving his new star back down the card. This led to Mabel becoming such a nobody so quickly that by January 1996, he was gone from the company altogether. He came back in 1998 as the newly named Viscera. Of course, this wasn't exactly a main event role either. Now, Viscera was mostly used as easy wins for people going after the Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness. But at least it couldn't get any worse than this, right? Well, as it turned out, it could get much worse. After a time as the Hugh Hefner-like world's largest love machine, Nelson Frazier changed again. This time, he became Big Daddy V, the jobber to end all jobbers. He spent most of his time wrestling in ECW in what might be the worst ring gear ever worn. If you ever want an example of what not to wear to the ring, just look up what the former King of the Ring was wearing in 2007 and 2008. Be ready to see something you can't unsee. Nelson Frazier Jr. passed away in 2014 at the age of 43. The Warlord arrived in WWE in 1988 as one half of the Powers of Pain alongside the Barbarian. At first, they were brought in as good guys to help Tito Santana get revenge on Demolition. The crowds loved them. They were big, they were powerful, and they looked like the Road Warriors. What wasn't to like? At SummerSlam 1988, they beat the Bolsheviks. At Survivor Series, they were involved in a famous double turn where Mr. Fuji betrayed Demolition and joined the Powers of Pain. Now the Powers were bad guys, and Demolition were good guys. It was a big moment that should have led to big things. But as heels, the Powers of Pain couldn't beat anybody important. They feuded with Demolition for months, but could never win the big one. They lost at WrestleMania 5. They lost on house shows. They just kept losing. Some say Demolition was jealous of the pops the Powers of Pain were getting and politicked to keep them down. Whatever the reason, the team never reached its potential. By 1990, the team was split up. Some say the split happened because the Legion of Doom was coming to WWE, and the company didn't want two teams that looked so similar. As a singles wrestler, the Warlord got a new look. Gone was the Road Warrior-style face paint. Now he had a shaved head and wore a weird metallic mask that made him look like a villain from a He-Man cartoon. He carried a metal staff to the ring. It was all very silly. He was given a program against Hulk Hogan, challenging for the title at house shows for about 3 months. But nothing ever came of it. At WrestleMania 7, he lost to the British Bulldog in an okay match. After that, he had a long series of matches with the Texas Tornado that went nowhere. His last WWE match was a loss to Virgil in Birmingham, England. The man who had once been part of a hot tag team was now losing to mid-carders overseas. Marty Jannetty was one half of the Rockers, one of the most popular tag teams of the late 80s and early 90s. Along with Shawn Michaels, he helped define what a high-flying tag team could be in WWE. The Rockers were different from other tag teams of that era. While most teams relied on power moves and brawling, the Rockers were all about speed and athleticism. They would fly around the ring, hit double drop kicks, and put on matches that made crowds go wild. Their matches against the Brainbusters were some of the best tag team matches of that period. One match at Madison Square Garden in January 1989 was rated as one of the 50 greatest matches in Pro Wrestling Illustrated's history. The Rockers actually won the WWE Tag Team titles in late 1990, but the reign was scrubbed from the record books because of issues with the match. The famous barbershop segment where Shawn Michaels threw Marty through the window is one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. This should have been the start of a great feud between the two. Marty as the wronged partner seeking revenge, Shawn as the cowardly heel who attacked his friend. It had all the ingredients for something special, but Marty had problems outside the ring. Just days after that segment, he was arrested outside a nightclub in Tampa for drug possession and was suspended from WWE. The feud with Shawn had to be put on hold for months. When he came back, he had some good moments, including beating Shawn for the Intercontinental title in a match that won Match of the Year honors. But he couldn't stay out of trouble. He was fired and rehired multiple times throughout the early and mid-90s. By 1996, WWE paired him with Al Snow as the new Rockers. It was supposed to be a comedy act, like watching the 60s TV show The Monkees. Word was that Shawn Michaels himself suggested making the gimmick silly. In WCW in 1998, Marty was used as a jobber from day one, losing to Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Chris Jericho. His last WCW match came in August 1998, a loss to Conan where he hurt his shoulder. The man who was once half of one of the best tag teams ever became a cautionary tale about what happens when personal demons get in the way. Tatanka is a perfect example of a wrestler who was given every chance to succeed but just couldn't get over the hump. When he debuted in early 1992, he was given a monster push. The company made a big deal about his Native American heritage, and he played the part well with his war dance entrance and tomahawk chops. What made Tatanka different from other Native American characters was that Chris Chavis, the man behind the character, was actually Native American. He was a member of the Lumbee tribe from North Carolina. This gave his character an authenticity that previous Native American gimmicks had lacked. For almost 2 years, Tatanka went undefeated on WWE television. Think about that for a moment. 2 full years without losing a match on TV. He beat Rick Martel, he beat the Mountie, he even beat Shawn Michaels in non-title matches. He won a 40-man battle royal called Bashed in the USA in May of 1992. Everything was being set up for him to be a major star. At WrestleMania 9, he got his shot at the Intercontinental title against Shawn Michaels. The match was actually one of the best on the card. Tatanka showed he could hang with one of the best workers in the company. But Tatanka won by countout, which meant Michaels kept the title. It was a frustrating finish that never really got resolved. Fans never got to see Tatanka finally capture that title. Then Ludwig Borga ended his streak in October 1993 thanks to a steel chair and help from Mr. Fuji. After the match, Yokozuna attacked Tatanka and put him out of action for 3 months. The streak was over, and with it, some of Tatanka's mystique. When Tatanka came back in 1994, he wasn't getting the same reactions anymore. The fans had moved on. The company tried to freshen things up by turning him heel, having him join Ted's $1 million corporation. The turn actually worked well with a great reveal at SummerSlam, where Tatanka was shown to be the real sellout, not Lex Luger. But as a heel, Tatanka had nowhere to go but down. He feuded with Luger for a while, then teamed with Bam Bigelow. They made it to the finals of a tag team tournament at Royal Rumble 1995, but lost to the 1-2-3 Kid and Bob Holly. After that, Tatanka just faded away, leaving in 1996 due to family and spiritual reasons. The man who was once undefeated for 2 years became just another mid-carder who flirted with the main event, but never quite got there. Bryan Adams started in 1990 as part of Demolition, the team that was supposed to be WWE's answer to the Road Warriors. By the time Crush joined, the team was already on its way down. They added him as a third member, hoping to breathe new life into the act, but it didn't help. The fans weren't buying it. Demolition was done by early 1991, and Adams was left without a spot. Rather than release Adams, WWE decided to give him a new gimmick. Now he was just Crush, a friendly Hawaiian babyface who crushed things with his bare hands. He had a feud with Doink the Clown where he had to overcome the evil clown's tricks. It was silly stuff aimed at kids, but the crowds liked him well enough. He even crushed a coconut with his bare hands to show how strong he was. It wasn't main event material, but it was something. Then in late 1993, everything changed. Randy Savage's heel turn needed a target, and Crush was chosen to be that target. Savage attacked Crush backstage in a brutal segment, supposedly crushing his head in a vice. When Crush came back months later, he was a heel too, now portrayed as a bitter man who felt Savage and the WWE fans had turned their backs on him while he was injured. This version of Crush had a brief main event run that showed what he could do. He was part of Yokozuna's team against Lex Luger's team at Survivor Series 1993 in one of the featured matches of the night. He feuded with Savage throughout early 1994, and the matches had real intensity. At WrestleMania 10, Crush beat Savage in a Falls Count Anywhere match. For a moment there, it looked like Crush might stick in the upper card. But after 1994, it all fell apart. Crush was paired with Mr. Fuji and became just another mid-card heel without direction. By 1995, he was part of the gang known as the Nation of Domination, lost in the shuffle. By 1996, he was gone from WWE altogether. He went to WCW and joined the NWO, but he was never more than a background player there, just another body filling out the group. He came back to WWE in 2001 for a brief run, as part of Chronic with Brian Clark, but by then he was just another guy on a bloated roster. Bryan Adams passed away in 2007, at just 43 years old. Koko B. Ware came to WWE in 1986 with a flashy bird gimmick and a parrot named Frankie. He was a good high flyer who could work with anybody. Kids loved the bird. His theme song Pile Driver was catchy, and he had real energy that connected with crowds. For the first few years, Koko was given meaningful TV time. He had feuds with guys like Nikolai Volkov and the Honky Tonk Man. He even challenged for the Intercontinental title a few times. His matches were fun, and the crowds were into him. He was never going to be WWE champion, but he was a solid mid-card act that fans liked. But by 1990, things had changed. Koko was still around, but he wasn't getting pushed anymore. He was being used to put over newer talent. At WrestleMania 6, he lost to the Big Boss Man. At WrestleMania 7, he lost to the Mountie. At WrestleMania 8, he teamed with Owen Hart and lost to the Nasty Boys. 3 straight WrestleMania losses tells you where he was on the card. By 1993, he was teaming with Owen Hart as High Energy. It was a fun team, but they were clearly a lower card act. They wore neon colors and had high-energy matches, but the company never pushed them for the tag team titles. They broke up soon after, and Koko was quietly let go from the company in 1994. The man who was once a popular mid-carder became just another body to fill TV time before fading away entirely. One Man Gang was a monster heel who terrorized territories throughout the early 80s before coming to WWE in 1987. At 6'9" and over 450 pounds, he was a terrifying presence. He was managed by Slick and looked like he could be a serious threat to anyone on the roster. And at first, WWE treated him that way. He won a Battle Royal on Saturday night's main event. He made it to the finals of the tournament to crown a new WWE champion at WrestleMania 4. He only lost to Randy Savage because of outside interference from the $1 Million Man. He was positioned as one of the top heels in the company, someone who could have been world champion with the right booking. Then came the gimmick change that killed his momentum. In late 1988, Slick announced that One Man Gang had discovered his African roots and would now be known as Akeem the African Dream. This was a parody of Dusty Rhodes, who was the American Dream. The problem was, One Man Gang was a white guy from South Carolina, being told to act like he was African. It was offensive and silly all at once. One-man gang, now Akeem, went from being a scary monster to a dancing joke almost overnight. He teamed with the Big Boss Man for a while, but he was clearly just a comedy character now. Any fear factor he had was completely gone. By 1990, Akeem was gone from WWE. He would return briefly to WCW in the mid-90s as One-Man Gang again, but he was past his prime by then. A guy who could have been a main event heel was turned into a punchline because of one bad gimmick change. The Honky Tonk Man held the Intercontinental title for 454 days, the longest reign in history until Gunther broke it in 2023. He was one of the most hated heels in WWE, and that was exactly what made him so effective. Fans paid their hard-earned money just to see someone take the title away from him. His reign was defined by cowardly tactics. He would take intentional countout or disqualification losses just to keep the title. He fended off challengers like Randy Savage, Brutus Beefcake, and Jake Roberts through every underhanded tactic possible. Jimmy Hart was always at ringside to interfere when needed. Fans hated him, and that hatred drew money. Then at SummerSlam 1988, everything changed. Honky issued an open challenge for the Intercontinental title. The Ultimate Warrior answered that challenge and pinned him in just 31 seconds. The pop from Madison Square Garden remains one of the loudest in WWE history. But for Honky, it was the beginning of the end. After losing the title, his role shifted dramatically. He formed the tag team Rhythm and Blues with Greg Valentine, both of them dyeing their hair black and adopting an Elvis impersonator look. They recorded a song called Hunka Hunka Honky Love that allegedly went gold. But they were clearly a lower card act, never winning any tag team titles. It was a far cry from holding the Intercontinental title for over a year. He left WWE in 1991 over contract disputes. When he went to WCW in 1994, he was gone after only a handful of matches due to issues with Eric Bischoff. Bischoff later said firing Honky was one of his favorite firings ever. Honky returned to WWE in 1997 as a manager for Rockabilly, but the angle flopped badly. The man who once had the longest Intercontinental title reign in history became a nostalgia act, showing up for Royal Rumbles only to get eliminated quickly. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was a legitimate star in Mid-South Wrestling before coming to WWE in 1987. He had been a main eventer there, feuding with the $1 Million Man and holding championships. His patriotic working-class everyman gimmick got huge reactions. He carried a 2x4 to the ring and led the crowd in chants of USA that shook arenas. In WWE, he won the first ever Royal Rumble in 1988 by eliminating One-Man Gang. He feuded with the likes of Andre the Giant, the $1 Million Man, and Harley Race. He defeated Haku in 1989 to win the right to call himself the King of Wrestling. For a while there, it seemed like Duggan might be a main event player. But Duggan was never given a run with the WWE title. Part of this was due to an incident in 1987 where he and the Iron Sheik were arrested together, exposing the business since they were supposed to be enemies. After that, Duggan was brought back but in a lower spot on the roster. Throughout the early 90s, he suffered a series of losses to guys like Yokozuna and Bam Bigelow. By 1993, he was a full-time lower card act, and he left for WCW in 1994. He beat Steve Austin for the US title on his first night there, which was a nice moment. But after that brief push, he settled into the lower card again. By the late 90s in WCW, Duggan's health was declining and he was barely used. At one point, he found the TV title in the trash after Scott Hall threw it away and claimed it as his own. The man who won the first Royal Rumble was now literally picking championships out of garbage cans. The Barbarian was one half of the Powers of Pain with the Warlord. They were a feared team in the NWA before coming to WWE, where they feuded with Demolition. After the team split in 1990, the Barbarian was managed by Bobby Heenan and positioned as a singles threat. He was even scheduled to challenge Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title at This Tuesday in Texas in 1991, but he no-showed the event and was replaced by Skinner. It was a missed opportunity that hurt his standing with the company. He participated in the 1992 Royal Rumble, but was eliminated by Hercules. He left WWE in February 1992. In WCW, he challenged Ron Simmons for the World Heavyweight Championship at Halloween Havoc 1992. It was a big opportunity, but nothing came of it. He came back to WWE briefly in 1994-95 as Sione, but was just a lower card act, losing to guys like Lex Luger and Diesel. In late 1995, he returned to WCW as part of the Masked Super Assassins with the Warlord, but that lasted only a few weeks before the Warlord left. Then he joined the Faces of Fear with Ming, firmly a mid-card tag team that would never challenge for the main titles. The man who was once part of a hot tag team challenging for championships spent the rest of his career as a hired muscle act. Greg Valentine was an Intercontinental Champion in the mid-80s. His feud with Tito Santana over that title was one of the most memorable of the era. Their matches were brutal, stiff affairs that felt like real fights. Valentine held the title for 285 days and had classic matches against some of the best workers in the company. He was known for his devastating figure 4 leg lock and his hard-hitting style. He wasn't flashy, but he was respected by his peers as someone who could go in the ring. His matches against Roddy Piper, where he defended the title, were highlights of that period. But by 1989, Valentine was sliding down the card fast. He formed the tag team Rhythm and Blues with Honky Tonk Man, dyeing his hair black and adopting the Elvis impersonator look. It was a far cry from the serious competitor he had been. The Hammer, as he was known, was now dancing to the ring and singing songs. They were a comedy act that never won any titles and mostly lost to the teams that mattered. By 1991, Valentine was being used as a jobber on the way out the door. He had a brief run as a good guy, which gave him some fun matches against guys like the Mountie, but he was clearly not a priority. He went to WCW but never regained his former status. The man who once held the Intercontinental title for nearly a year and had 5-star matches became just another name on the roster, then just another name on the indie circuit. Rick Martel was one half of Strikeforce with Tito Santana, and they were the WWE Tag Team Champions in 1987. Martel was a good-looking, athletic wrestler who could work with anybody. Before WWE, he had been the AWA World Heavyweight Champion, holding that title for over a year. So he had legitimate main event credentials that most wrestlers could only dream of. When Strikeforce split up in 1989 at WrestleMania 5, Martel reinvented himself as the model Rick Martel. He came to the ring in fancy robes and sprayed the crowd with his cologne Arrogance. It was a fun heel gimmick that got good heat. The model thought he was better than everyone else, and he made sure everyone knew it. He had memorable feuds with guys like Jake Roberts, where he blinded Jake with Arrogance in one of the more shocking angles of that period. Jake had to wrestle blind for months, and when he finally got his hands on Martel, the crowd was ready to explode. Martel also feuded with Tatanka over those sacred eagle feathers, which gave both guys something meaningful to fight about. But despite the entertaining character work, Martel was never pushed higher than the mid-card as a singles wrestler in WWE. He challenged for the Intercontinental title multiple times but never won it. He was always just below the main event, a guy who could have a good match with anybody but wasn't seen as championship material by the people making decisions. It was frustrating because the talent was clearly there. By the early 90s, Martel was firmly a mid-card act, losing to the latest up-and-comers. He lost to Tatanka at multiple pay-per-views. He was eliminated early from Royal Rumbles. At WrestleMania 8, he wrestled Shawn Michaels to a double countout in a nothing match. By 1995, he was gone from WWE altogether. He went to WCW briefly, but he was past his prime by then and dealing with injuries. The former AWA World Champion, a man who had main-evented shows all over the world before WWE even existed, ended his career as a lower card act that the newer generation of fans didn't even remember. It was a waste of genuine talent. Speaking of Strikeforce, Tito Santana had an even longer fall. He was a 2-time Intercontinental Champion in the early to mid-80s. His feuds with Greg Valentine and Randy Savage were highlights of that era. He was popular with the fans, had great matches, and could work with anybody in the company. He was the kind of reliable hand that every company needs. Tito was there for some of the biggest moments in WWE history. He competed at the first WrestleMania. He was part of the team that took on the Dream Team at WrestleMania 2. He teamed with Rick Martel as Strikeforce and won the tag team titles. For years, he was a dependable upper mid-card act that fans loved. But as the 80s turned into the 90s, Tito found himself sliding down the card. The company gave him the gimmick of El Matador, where he came out dressed as a bullfighter. It was a step down from being just Tito Santana. The gimmick didn't get over the way the company hoped, and it felt like they were trying to repackage someone who didn't need to be repackaged in the first place. As El Matador, Tito was firmly a lower card act. He lost to guys like Shawn Michaels and the Mountie on a regular basis. At WrestleMania 9, he lost to Papa Shango in a nothing match that nobody remembers. It was a far cry from the guy who once held the Intercontinental title and had classic matches at previous WrestleManias. By 1993, Tito was quietly let go from WWE after nearly a decade with the company. He went to the independent circuit, where he had a solid career working for various promotions. But the man who was once one of the top babyfaces in WWE history ended his major league career dressed as a bullfighter and losing to mid-carders. It was a sad end for someone who deserved better, a guy who helped build WWE into what it became. These wrestlers are examples that show just how quickly things can change in this business. One day you're on top of the world, holding championships and main eventing pay-per-views. The next day, you're just another face in the crowd, losing matches on the B shows and wondering what went wrong. The 80s and 90s were full of these stories. Big men who lost their aura after one bad loss. Tag team specialists who couldn't make it as single stars no matter how hard they tried. Champions who took one bad gimmick change and never recovered. Former main eventers who ended up picking titles out of trash cans. The wrestling business chews people up and spits them out without mercy. And these 17 wrestlers learned that lesson the hard way. But here's the thing. Every single one of these guys had their moment in the sun. They got to feel what it was like to be cheered by thousands of fans, to hold championships, to be somebody in this crazy business. That's more than most people ever get. So while their falls from grace were painful to watch, at least they had somewhere to fall from. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.